Well, thank you all for coming. This is our spring 2015 MSREI meeting. And it's fun to do this sort of a get-together twice a year. And also, in bringing everyone together to invite thought leaders in our community, and our community has become global, to share their ideas and innovations and how this may apply here locally and how we take care of our patients, that there's a practical application to what we do, to challenge the settled ideas, and to know that every innovation is just a step before the next one and not an endpoint in and of itself. And so it's really fun that we can all get together, share a great meal, and learn along the way, actually learn. And because Pavlov was correct in everything, bringing food to the table brings everyone together and gives us a great opportunity to do so. But tonight we have a very special guest in Dr. Behr. And Barry's story is discovery. Discovery from when he came from South Africa to the US, to the Southeast, and trying to discover what he wanted to do in his life, which is where we're all at. And during his college years, discovering where his passion was. And sometimes it's timing, too, that opportunities avail themselves. And it's not that we don't have opportunities, it's recognizing them when they're in front of us. And Barry was coming into an era where assisted reproductive technologies in IVF in the mid-'80s was just not even coming of age, just nascent, coming at all. And discovered molecular biology and reproductive physiology to be an area that he fell in love with. And from there, fell into an opportunity to work in an IVF lab. Just to, in part of life, we talked about, half of life is just showing up. And then he took fire on that and just exploded with curiosity, innovation, not letting the settled status quo be the end all, but it's what's next, what can help, what can improve things. And he's had quite an exciting journey, and through different innovations within our reproductive medicine area. In molecular biology, also in embryo culture, and in meeting other people and collaborating, evolving to a point where he's really, truly one of the thought leaders in our field. And it all came from a spark inside of himself. And one of the lessons that I've learned from Barry today is that no matter where you start out in your life, if you have it inside of you, there are opportunities. You can, if you will, rise to those opportunities, and those opportunities will be very fulfilling in your life. I think a lot of it is knowing why you want to do what you want to do, and then figuring out how to do it. Now, being the both scientific director at and also involved in the clinical aspects of their program at Stanford, I think he's elevated the team that he works with to integrate both the science and the clinical application. And coming from a science background and always having his eye on the medical side of things, he brings a very special talent to his team. And I'm really grateful for him being willing to come visit here and share some of his discoveries that are going to be the ongoing steps to the next discoveries. I think what prompted me to give Barry a call was we need to find a better way to at least figure out what embryos are really going to lead to having a baby. This is sort of the holy grail. I guess the holiest grail is if it's not, how can we fix it so it does? But there are certain technologies coming up that are both from time lapse and observing changes, and also from the genetic basis of things, the blueprint that can give us an idea. But we're still in the nascent level of understanding there. One of the things that struck me recently, and I don't know, do any of you watch the ASRM journal clubs online? I think they're fantastic. I think you get expert opinions from all over the world. People are brainstorming. They're real people. No one's lionized in a sense that they just say things from up high, and you not only learn what is maybe the best thing, but you learn the imperfections and uncertainties, which may be even more important than anything we absolutely know at this point, because that's where questions are asked and we seek out further answers. But something struck me on a journal club a few months ago, and it was on time lapse. And it was the embryology team at NYU. And he described how all his embryologists are using time lapse. And they're there hours and hours and hours, like a night watchman, watching the video to figure out which embryo is going to be the one. And they're shifting their time invested in their field to truly being a night watchman watching the VHS tape to make sure no one's robbing the cash register. And all their skill sets in the laboratory are going to the side. And as Suzanne said earlier, I mean, maybe you can just watch them from home, you know, as long as the NSA doesn't watch along with you. I mean, so absorbing all their time, I then came across a new idea, which Barry will introduce to us tonight, of other technology that can help guide us, utilize our time more efficiently perhaps, but give us greater insight into embryos in a way that we never imagined before. So with that, I'd like to turn the podium and presentation over to our guest speaker, Barry Behr.
Well, good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. You guys are all right? If not, yeah, throw something at me or wave your hands and I'll try to speak louder or be more clear. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's a hit and run trip for me. I arrived about an hour and a half ago and I'm leaving at 6:30. I'm on the plane, or my flight leaves at 6:30 tomorrow morning. But it's really a pleasure to be here to see people that I haven't seen in a while, that I know, and many of you I don't know, so hello, and hello from Stanford in California. I'm here to tell you a story about something I was involved with the development of, and hopefully have it be informal. So I know we have a diverse group of audience, and I would like to connect with each of you, and if you don't understand something I'm saying, raise your hand. I'd be happy to try explain it further. And I couldn't be happier as a male with a TV screen and a remote control. I should be completely in control. But this is new to me, so I'll see how I do. So I want to make a disclosure. I was an inventor of the technology, or one of the inventors of the technology I'm going to share with you, which came out of Stanford University, which landed up resulting in a company being formed called Oxygen. And actually the company's name's changed now. Some of you may have gotten an email. I have nothing to do with the company. I was a co-founder of the company. I helped raise money to get it founded and funded, and then the company's been doing its own thing for the last 5 years. So I'm here to tell you a story with some, again, with some disclosures, but hopefully with the inside story so that you understand how this particular technology evolved and how it fits in the work we do, which is really trying to help our patients become parents, because all of this is what this is all about, not really about just coming to work every day. So the goal of my talk with you today is to talk to you about the story behind the Eeva Test, as I mentioned, as an inventor, to tell you a little bit about what's out there, some of the published data that sort of arrived at the status of FDA approval. Also talk to you about some other non-validation studies, and then try to elaborate on how I think and why I think this is an important contribution to one's lab. So this story began in the mid-2000s. One of my interests, as Mike alluded to, is trying to improve embryo selection. I think the Achilles heel of the IVF process is trying to identify which embryo, or ideally which egg, but we're certainly much further away from that, which embryo is going to make a baby. And it's not as simple as looking at embryos and doing a beauty contest. We all have difficulty, and hence we have multiple pregnancies in IVF because we have difficulty identifying which embryo. If we knew which embryo was going to implant, I'm fairly certain we all would transfer one embryo at a time. So we began on a project, myself and two other individuals, a stem cell biologist and an engineer, to try come up with a technique that would allow us to watch embryos divide and see if we could pick up any pearls during their division under the microscope. After about 3 or 4 years worth of work, which involved doing multiple time-lapse experiments on about 300 IVF embryos, we came up with a publication that was published in Nature Biotech, right here, published in 2010, and the title was Non-Invasive Imaging of Human Embryos Before Embryonic Genome Activation Predicts Development to the Blastocyst Stage. And there were many people who were criticizing this work, like, well, why do you need to predict the blastocyst stage? We could just grow embryos to the blastocyst stage and predict them that way. You don't have to predict, you can see them. And I'm going to answer this question towards the end of my talk, because you will see it is really those patients that you grow to blastocyst that this technology really has most benefit for. In other words, patients who have 1 or 2 embryos, who typically you don't go to blastocyst with, and you're not doing selection on, having an additional selection measure doesn't really help you that much. It's really those better patients or egg donors or patients who have lots of good quality embryos that you would go to blastocyst on. This technology is helpful. And why we came up with the predicting blastocyst development was because that's as far as you could go with research embryos. I manage a biobank at Stanford, and we had 2PN embryos that we could thaw, and we could get them to the blastocyst stage, but clearly you can't implant them and make a baby with these embryos. So that's why we published this work. It was the need and the desire to improve embryo selection. I've been involved in a few other endeavors to try to select embryos with metabolomics, for example. Had a stint with that for a few years. Some of you may recall that came and went. But I believed that there was something in the cadence of human embryo development that we could pick some pearls from if this system was developed well. So we developed this work, and I'm going to show you actually this video right here. I'm trying to figure this pointer out. But this video right here, I'm going to show you the actual video. But this was our first annotated video that we were able to put together images of embryos growing every 5 minutes for 5 days. And it turns out that at the end of the day, we really only needed to image the embryos for 48 hours to come up with a very, very high sensitivity and specificity of predicting which embryos were going to make it to these viable or expanded blastocyst stage. So not only did we measure the embryos' cadence and their timings of cell divisions, we took embryos as they were developing and looked at their gene expression. And we looked at about 100 different genes related to cell division, and actually a whole variety of genes, actually. And it turns out the ones that were related in cell division were significantly different between those embryos that developed properly and those embryos that tended to stall between cell divisions. So we were able to, I know it says here somewhere, gene expression. This was very key, that we were able to actually confirm these aberrations in timing to underlying molecular aberrations in the programming. So there was something wrong in the code that we were able to actually detect that went along with these arrested or slow embryos that you will see right there. No, not yet. The video will be coming. What I want to point out, which I think is difficult to see at the bottom, that these timings have now been validated by a variety of other investigators across the globe, and I'm going to talk about some of that data as we go. So I want to show you, if I can do this with some coordination, find my pointer, excuse me, right we go. This was the first annotated video. This is from the end of 2007, where you could see we actually had embryos all growing together in a single drop, and we were digitizing their cell membranes so we could actually measure the times of cell division. And I don't know if you can see from the back, but some embryos in the red are labeled non-viable, and the ones in the white are labeled viable, and we were able to do this after 48 hours of culture. That was the media change to day 3 media, blast culture, and you will notice that the embryos that were labeled with viable on day 3 were the ones that made it to good-looking blastocysts. As an aside, you may want to ask me, how did you track these embryos when you changed them from dish to dish? Well, the engineers were actually pretty smart, the ones that invented this sort of character recognition, if you will, of the cell membranes. The embryologists in the room will be able to tell you that these are embryos from IVF, because these little specks on the zona pellucida are actually sperm that were prevented from entering the egg during fertilization to prevent polyspermy. And the engineers actually used like facial recognition, character recognition, to track these embryos so that we were able to keep the digital labels on them while they were moving in culture. So that was quite a feat. If we fast forward now about 5 years, and we look at how the technology evolved, we couldn't rely on character recognition because half the patients in the country, if not more, or the fertilizations are derived from ICSI. And ICSI doesn't have any sperm on the outside of the zona because by definition you're injecting only one sperm into the egg. So we had to develop a dish that had this particular dish, the second generation dish had 25 wells in it. And you could place embryos in individual wells, and someone who's someone to hold over from animal science who likes to grow embryos in groups and take the benefit of the cytokines from embryos growing together, had a problem with growing embryos in individual wells. So we developed this system right here that you're looking at. It's not the system that is in the final form, which I'll show you in a little while, but it allowed us to keep embryos, if I can find my cursor, there we go, keep embryos isolated in a well, but also allow them to share media. So this is the newer version of the software, where you will see each division now is annotated with a different color ring. And the software is able to actually keep track of each division and calculate the intermitotic intervals and come up with a diagnosis, if you will, of the embryos by day 3 regarding their viability potential. So this brings us up to about 2012. I've got my years mixed up. I don't know. I can't use jet lag as an excuse. I just got here. 2012, the company decided to complete the FDA submission process to get this technology approved so that it could be approved for what it's actually being used for, which is embryo diagnostics. So they embarked on a trial that included 5 IVF programs in California. This company was based in California, started in Stanford, as I mentioned. It moved out of Stanford to a private building, and the 5 clinics that you see here were 4 in Northern California and 1 in Southern California. 1 clinic that only does day 3 transfers, 1 clinic that only does day 5 transfers, and the other 3 clinics does a mixture of both, like most of us do. It was about 1,900 or 1,825 embryos were looked at. And the key for this development was really to be able to identify a system that would work no matter what culture media you use, no matter how old your patient was, no matter whether you did ICSI or not, whether you use sequential media or monoculture media. The goal was really to develop a model that would be generalizable. And it was key to enroll clinics that had these different types of practices. The day 3 practice grew in 5% CO2 in air versus tri-gas, how most of us culture. So there really was quite a degree of diversity in the type of practices enrolled in this initial study. So the data was generated from these 5 centers, as I mentioned, about 1,825 embryos. And these parameters were then validated or tested against an independent data set. So if you take these parameters and then overlay them on independent embryo development data, they were basically checked against a virtual data set. And it was this type of rigor that the FDA required to derive a de novo clearance category for time-lapse microscopy. Now, time-lapse isn't a new idea. It's kind of interesting, I failed to mention to you, that paper that we published in 2010, prior to that, there were about somewhere between a half dozen to a dozen papers published in the literature on time-lapse on human embryos. Since that publication in 2010, in the last 5 years, there's now over 100 papers published on time-lapse. So this really lit a fire. So it's not brand new. This didn't just come out last year. This is a technology that's been going on for a decade or two. There are companies out there that have FDA approval before June of 2014, which is when this got FDA approval. But none of them have FDA approval for an embryo diagnostic. So what the company sought out, which I certainly, in retrospect, support and supported when we had this idea, that we didn't want to be like everyone else, see us at ASRM with a big booth trying to sell you to buy for research use only, like a lot of technology is in our field. A lot of technology is sort of tested or proven on our patients, and I'm glad the company had an issue with that and wanted to get the FDA approval before you would see it at an ASRM meeting, which is the case going forward. So with this data and this independent, first of all, the generalizable model, the independent data set is what the FDA needed to derive this de novo clearance, which arrived at the Eeva test as we know it. Well, actually not as we know it today. This was the FDA approval of the system we invented or developed at Stanford, which was that big dish, the 25-well dish, which was too big. It turns out when you use it in a clinical setting like we did in the trial, and you're moving around, that the embryos can jump ship. And if you're tracking embryos and they jump ship, that doesn't help you track embryos. So they basically came up with a system that now has 12 wells instead of 25. They're slightly larger, they're more ergonomic for the embryo. The embryos stay in there easier. You can walk without, even if you have some Parkinson's or you had too much coffee in the morning, you can still carry your dish to the microscope without worrying about the embryos bubbling over, if you will. So this is how the Eeva test arrived in June of 2014. Since then, none of us ever saw it. I didn't see an FDA approval. They didn't go out and market this until they had their next generation software, which really, to be quite honest, the Eeva system is a software. It's a device, which I'll show you momentarily. In fact, I'm not going to steal my own thunder. Let's just get to it. I'll get to it in a minute. Sorry, I'm ahead of myself. I've got put a little animation together that basically will say it better than I can. But let me just describe the Eeva test as it was pitched to the FDA and how it would really work for people who work in the IVF world, particularly those of us in the laboratory, but also for the clinical team, the nurses and the physicians who interact with patients, who want to reflect back on a prior IVF cycle or prognosticate on a current IVF cycle with this body of information that we now can have available to us. The key here is, number one, it's an easy way to help embryologists select the best embryos for transfer. Mike couldn't have done a better introduction. In fact, I wanted to say amen when you were done, to be quite honest, on a number of things that you said. But as it pertains to time lapse, unfortunately, without the provision of a diagnostic, of a result of these time lapse, it's not easy. You still rely on your own interpretation. You still rely on the time it's going to take to watch individual embryos growing for 48 to 140 hours, depending on how far you grow your embryos. So you want an easy way, and not because we're lazy, but you want something that's going to give you a result, something that you can act on. It saves time, as it says here, and resources by eliminating the need for manual review as is required by other systems. So that box is checked. It is generalizable. I mean, by design, this was tested and proven to be generalizable to fit whether you do day 3 transfer, day 5 transfer, if you use antagonists or you use long protocols, if you use sequential media or you use monoculture media, if you use low oxygen or ambient oxygen. This model was designed to fit in any type of IVF lab. And again, the confidence intervals are wide enough that allow for that. And it's objective. It's very much like a CASA system for computer-assisted semen analyzer, for those of you who don't know what a CASA is, for semen analysis. It's like having your same tech in the same mood, at the same time of day, the same hydration and caffeine status, counting sperm and doing morphology every day, which doesn't happen. There's human variability, which this system does not introduce. So objective and consistent. And then last but not least, probably the most important, it's a prognostic test. This is something that's actually giving you a result. It's not something that just takes a whole bunch of images that you then have to read or watch with some popcorn, even from home. All these systems, by the way, I know someone back there mentioned that maybe we can evaluate embryos from home. The technology is here today to do that. But fortunately, Alyssa, someone still has to put the embryos in the dish, and someone still has to take them out of the dish. So I don't think I'm going to get our bioengineers too excited about IVF, because they will replace us for that part in no time at all. So I want to give you a little introduction to the whole system. This is an Eeva system. It consists of 4 microscopes, a control panel, and 2 little touch screens that fit on the incubator door. This is the fancy 12-well system I was describing. The zygotes, so after fertilization, either ICSI or IVF, the zygotes are placed in that middle well of the dish that has 3 rinsing wells. It's covered with oil. The dish is then placed in the camera system that sits in your standard incubator. You can see the patient's name, ID number, and then I didn't point out, but there's a green light that allows you to center the dish so that it's oriented properly. You have a little touch screen that allows you to also enter data if you want to, although it's easier to enter on the control panel. But just like an iPhone or an iPad, you touch the screen. This is my video that doesn't work, I'm afraid. But the same kind of video as I showed you before, except it's better resolution. And you'll notice here that there are only 12 wells, not 25. But when at the end of day 2 or the morning of day 3, you'll see your wells shown in either yellow or green squares. And this is your morphology sheet that you would highlight the ones that were Eeva high. Remember, this was FDA approved to be an adjunct to morphology. So the goal is to not throw out what we know already works. We know that outcomes are correlated with embryo morphology. So to take what we already know and build on it. This is like getting another what you call it, another second opinion, if you will, on the situation. So that's how an Eeva system works. Now we took that system, or they took that system, and they took the data from the Eeva system, and Mike Diamond published a paper with a group of people from Oxygen and a few others. You may recognize Erika Benke's name in there. And they wanted to demonstrate or show how Eeva augments the ability to predict viability or blastocysts over morphology. And I just thought I'd throw this in here and why morphology is not perfect. This, by the way, these are bar stools. These are bar stools. So what you see, and I bet you didn't all think that when you first saw that picture. So, I mean, morphology is kind of problematic. We may see things differently, and once you point things out, they may become obvious. So I believe that when we judge embryos, we have a little bit of this bias in our head, and the time-lapse system will help us get away from that. So the objective of this particular study, the Mike Diamond paper, that was published last year, 2014 in JARG, was designed to determine whether the Eeva test, whether using the Eeva test adjunctively to morphology would allow embryologists with a diverse background to consistently improve their selection of better embryos. So what they did is they got these Eeva movies. Well, I'll show you. The study is going to be more clear right here. So it was prospective, IRB approved over a couple of year period, and it looked at odds ratio to determine whether the Eeva test is informative in predicting blastocysts among good and fair quality embryos. This is key. I think we all can tell you that when you look at a ball of frags, that embryo is probably not going to develop well. But when you look at good quality embryos, or lots of embryos, like I mentioned before with donors, or people who you think will make a lot of blastocysts, that's where the challenge becomes. Because we can look at 5 8-cell embryos and know that really only 2 or 3 of them are going to make blasts, but no one in this room including all of us putting our heads together, will have any greater wisdom than each other to be able to predict this. Inclusion criteria were pretty standard, good prognosis patients, greater than 8 2PNs, low FSH, high AFC, IVF or ICSI, ejaculated sperm. And again, it was just the people doing the test had nothing to do with the people looking at the embryos had nothing to do with the Eeva system. So the Eeva system was run, they were blinded to the Eeva test, Eeva results. So the Eeva results are being recorded in the background. They were using morphology like they normally do. So here's a little better breakdown. They used 5 embryologists from diverse backgrounds, from programs less than 300 cycles to greater than 1,000 cycles. Inexperienced and experienced, less than 3 years, greater than 10 years. So very diverse across the country, and they were not involved in the embryo culture and Eeva imaging. So this is a separate, they just had access to watch the videos. And there were about 758 embryos. So based on the morphology only, they selected the embryos with the highest developmental potential. They then used the morphology plus the Eeva test and selected the best embryos. And then those two groups were compared, which the blastocyst outcome was compared. Just a quick background for those of you who don't do this every day like myself, but just to remind you that these two things that we use a lot in outcomes, positive and negative predictive values. But the best really measure of an outcome is really an odds ratio, which takes both of these into consideration at the same time. And here's the equation or the formula for that. But the best part about it is it's a single test of performance, which takes into account the positive and the negative predictive values. And this paper used odds ratio as an endpoint. And here are the graphs of the predictions of the odds ratio on the left there of the 5 embryologists. The blue is their ability to predict the blastocyst from morphology only, and the light blue, the dark blue, excuse me, and the light blue is the morphology plus Eeva. And you can see, as you would expect with varying degrees of experience and the limited information you get from morphology, that the odds ratio for the different embryologists was different. And that's what you would expect. We're humans. We don't see things the same. Think of my nuns on the bar stools over there. And what you will notice then with Eeva, they are a lot more consistent, but all higher. And the key is higher. So the delta here, so what I just told you is pretty much right there. The delta here is what's important, which is when you add them all together, there's about a difference of about 50% over traditional morphology grading. And there's nothing that we do in our lives in embryology that gives us a 50% improvement in anything. We work in the dark, we wear funny clothes, we can't wear deodorant, you got a special air, and not a single one of those things gives you even probably a 10% improvement. But we would never let anyone violate those because we are so, OCD about getting the best results we can. So this was a big deal, in my opinion, and it got published. The study conclusions were that this test is a reproducible test in the hands of a broad range of embryologists with diverse backgrounds, which is the key because we have no guarantee, how good the company, you selling something, you have no guarantee what the level of experience of the users of your technology is going to be. And having something that works for a diverse background of individuals is generally safest. When used adjunctively with morphology, it was informative in helping embryologists select the best embryos, essentially. So this was an optimistic study. It showed promise, in my opinion. It didn't change pregnancy rates for anyone because it was on paper. So, I think it was time to see something else. So what else is out there? I've just grabbed a couple of anecdotal, and I hope to have some discussion about this. And especially controversial ones, especially blastocysts, because the blastocyst people always say, oh, you grew to blastocyst, how's this going to help you? Or we're doing PGS, why should we do this? Well, I'll show you, hopefully. This was presented at ASRM last year. These were from oocyte donors. I forget, row chart or something like that. I can't remember. Row fart. From Spain. Oocyte donors, blastocyst transfer, 1 to 2 embryos transferred. So you'll see here, Eeva group, fairly decent sample size for our profession. Blastocyst formation rate, no difference. Number of embryos transferred, no difference. Clinical pregnancy rate, 76 versus 63. I like that. That looks significant. Ongoing pregnancy rate, significantly different. Implantation rate, significantly different. Interestingly, the biggest difference, or the only statistically significant difference, was with the high-quality blastocysts. And this is where this technology gets the biggest criticism. It's like, well, you got good embryos. What do you need this for? Well, guess what? If you got more than one good embryo, you need this, because you really don't want to transfer more than one good embryo. If you got crap embryos, well, that's much easier. You can either put more in or not. It's not going to change the equation that much. And, you know, it's hard, and I apologize, it's cut off a little bit on the bottom, but these bottom numbers on the poor embryos, there was only 6 transfers, so, you know, I don't know to interpret too much from that. But the trends are all in the direction of, with donors who get pregnant if you just sneeze wrong near them, essentially can give you some bump in your outcomes, which to me is sexy and exciting. This is from David Adamson's practice, day 3 transfers only, and actually I've seen some data and I have it in an email, but I didn't get a chance to update this graph. This is stolen from a poster at ASRM last year, but basically day 3 prospective also, with and without Eeva, and you'll see there's some of these are statistically significant and some of these aren't. But the newer numbers now, they have about, did I put the number in here? There was something like 70-something patients in each arm. They're now up to 100 and something, and the difference is getting greater. So again, I think it's speaking to getting this in more people's hands. We're going to learn more about how this technology can help. And I will tell you that any time lapse will help. You know, I invented this, and I know it best, and I know the data best. But there's a lot of data out there on EmbryoScope, on PrimoVision, on ESCO. Well, ESCO doesn't have one yet, but I mean, everyone who has an incubator is going to come up with time lapse because of data like this. It works. What Eeva has and what this company has, which was smart by us or by them, is that they patented an algorithm and they have a system that allows them to automatically make a diagnosis. And that's what's the benefit for an embryologist, is that you don't have to, in the morning of day 3, is now watch videos all night, or the night of day 2, watch videos all night to come up with this information. So I'm going to end off with a couple of ideas that you may not have thought of how time lapse can actually deselect embryos. And we're talking about embryo selection, but probably what's more important is embryo deselection, is actually making your denominator smaller, because there is no single litmus test for viability. I'm convinced we're going to have to be doing genetic screening and some kind of a metabolic or development screen. Because just because you have the right code doesn't mean you're going to make a baby, and just because you don't have the right code doesn't mean you're not going to implant and have a miscarriage or something worse. So I believe that the future of our field will have some kind of a panel that we're going to look at to interrogate oocytes and embryos in a way that will, help selection. But abnormal cleavage occurs about 20% of the time, 18% here. And again, this video doesn't work, but I could show you what happens. Various forms of abnormal cleavage, going from 1 cell to 3 cells, direct cleavage. When you look at it on day 2 or you look at it on day 3, it could be a beautiful 6-cell or 5-cell or 7-cell or 8-cell embryo. But you missed that abnormal cleavage. About 18% of embryos go through abnormal cleavage. And if you look at the implantation rate, embryos with abnormal cleavage, implantation rate 4% versus 18%. Another one, abnormal syngamy. I apologize, these videos aren't working for me. If your embryos exhibit this chaotic pronuclear movement, they don't just approximate together like they're supposed to, 0 implantation from 163 embryos. 0. So wouldn't you want to know that? When you do your 2PN check, you look under the microscope, yep, it's fertilized, check. Doctor, we got 7 out of 8 fertilized, lab's great. Guess what? If they did that, you're not going to get pregnant. So the technology can help us. Also, this abnormal first cytokinesis, where you have this lemma ruffling, like you see here on the top left, and the embryo kind of stalls out. These things are actually picked up, and I didn't point out to you what these P1s are, by the way, but these are the first parameters that the software measures, is the division from 1 to 2 cells. So how long does it take? Once the embryo starts its cleavage furrow to go from 1 cell to 2 cell, and then P2 would be from 2 cells to 3 cells, and P3 would be from 3 cells to 4 cells. And that's essentially the simplicity of this technology. The trick is how to capture them accurately and to develop the algorithm. But you can see here, look at the difference in implantation rate if these embryos exhibit these ruffling or delayed cleavage from 1 cell to 2 cell. And to be quite honest, this parameter is actually the weakest one out of all of them. So the first development, the first cleavage, is actually the least significant out of the 3 parameters that are used by the software. Yes?
With those abnormal embryos, have you looked at euploid versus aneuploid?
No.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So the question was, in these embryos that have abnormal cleavage like this, do I have any information about their genetic composition? Are they euploid or aneuploid? And I don't. There is some data, I mean, I don't, but there is some data out there. I mean, you guys may have some data on these embryos that go from 1 to 3 are oftentimes aneuploid or total triploid, right? So the last bit of my talk this evening is going to be just to describe to you in the next few minutes about, you know, what this really means and what a de novo clearance is. The FDA is not easy to win over. And I think, you know, between us Girl Scouts, this company must have almost gone broke trying to do that, because they've changed their name, the CEO's gone, a bunch of people have changed. The technology is solid, and I'm confident that it will find a landing place somewhere. But it took pretty much the guts out of the company, it seems like, to get this the second FDA approval. And the reason for that is the FDA requires you to demonstrate, the rigor that is needed to get their stamp of endorsement. So it was first approved in June 2014, but that's not the system that I am using now, or you would use if you got the system. It was the new dish, the new software that I think was approved in December or somewhere around then of last year. And this de novo clearance, as opposed to 510 clearance, is a pathway for low risk, innovative technologies. It is much more rigorous than a 510K clearance. And this test, the Eeva system, was the first of its kind with a prognostic test assessment. And the difference really is, the difference really is that the Eeva system was approved for an embryo image assessment system versus the other systems that are out there that do have FDA approval, so they are legal to be used. They're approved as an IVF accessory. So just like a pipetter or an incubator or an ICSI needle, it's not actually approved for what people are really using them for. So what does this mean to us? Well, it means that we finally have an objective measure that works for all of us. This is something that morphology does not even offer. For example, I've consulted for a few clinics and have before. If you ask me what's my best embryo at Stanford, I'll tell you it's a grade 1. Some places it's a grade 4. They use the GPA system. Do you use Gardner's system? How do you standardize your grading when you get embryo records from another clinic without pictures? It's not always easy to know which is the best embryo. So this gives us all, clinicians and embryologists, a benchmark that we will be able to use going forward to have standard, consistent interpretation and potentially diagnostics. For patients, it gives them confidence that they potentially will have a yardstick that the embryos will be measured against from center to center or from cycle to cycle, that you can actually look at resolution that we couldn't before. We say, well, you had 5 8 cells last time, this time you have 3. Well, your cycle's worse. Well, you may not be. You may have had only 2 good embryos out of your 5 8 cells last time. And now we can tell because we have some yardstick to actually determine that. And this really is going to pave the way for these other companies who have probably inappropriately got FDA approval for their devices. But now that the oxygen system or the oxygen company, the Eeva system, has been FDA approved, it essentially paves the way for others now to get equivalence, which is a much lower bar to meet than a de novo category determination. So the question to all of us and to all of you is this Eeva system, or an embryoscope or time-lapse microscopy, the embryo's version of one of these? And really, where we are today would be like looking at this man without this big device on him and on the treadmill, saying, your cheeks are rosy. I think your heart is just fine. Your arteries are good, and you'll walk up a hill or get out of bed and keel over. So I'm hoping that this is a big step towards being able to get more quantitative, and less invasive in our embryo assessment. So that's all I have to say, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yeah. So the question was, do I have any data on elective single embryo transfer? I don't. And again, the problem, excellent question, and that is the $64,000. That's what needs to be done. Now remember, this technology just came on the market. I expect, as it gets into more people's hands, they're going to be doing the studies that are big to be answered, like your question. So that's what we need to do. I mean, the whole value of this, or one of the main values, is to help us move more comfortably into that arena. And most people aren't willing to do that routinely. So I hope to see more of that. The question was, do I have any data on aneuploidy screening and time-lapse in my lab? And I don't. The general consensus has been in the past, well, if you do aneuploidy screening, you don't need this. But my argument is, if you do aneuploidy screening and you have more than one euploid embryo, you really need this, because you don't really want to put in 2 good-looking blasts, and that implantation is not 100% with euploidy. So I would argue that data is begging to be generated, but just like the single embryo transfer question, no one's had access to this. It's not FDA approved, and they didn't. And again, I respect that, but there's the double-edged sword. You go out and try sell this, but you don't have the data because no one has it in their hands. So I expect, just like a few papers came out from Europe, and there are more. I just chose the donor egg blastocyst extreme case, and then the day 3 transfer, which is kind of the other extreme case, to show you from ASRM. How we did the trial, how we sort of developed the algorithm and the molecular genetics gene expression panel. And I may be able to show you some data that you would really like to see in another presentation I have on there. But basically, we had embryos. We didn't have a fancy microscope like that or an incubator. These were incubation chambers set up on inverted microscopes. Heated stage, top and bottom heat, a humidity, gas flow, taking images every 5 minutes. And then every day, we would take some embryos out of the pool. So from started on day 1, day 2, we would take some out, some that looked good, that were being measured, day 3, day 4, day 5. And then we did gene expression on single cells, so we disaggregated embryos as well as whole embryos. And we looked at gene expression profiles, and we sort of tallied them up, and then went back and looked at the videos. And we saw, and again, I have some graphs I'll try pull up real quick, that basically show how embryos that were embryos that made blastocyst had this level of gene expression, embryos that stalled at different places had this gene expression. So we had, and then we have this graph that shows for about 90 genes where the differences, I forget what it's called, but it's a circle. We have all the genes and you can see where the lines separate. And that's what we did, and we did a tree analysis, and we measured a whole bunch of things, and we just basically came up with 3 timing parameters that were predictive, and those things correlated with these gene expression profiles that we were able to generate. Now, how they did the validation, that's what got us money to start a company. Then the company built these products, these fancy microscopes that actually fit in your incubator, not an incubator that fits on your microscope, which is, we all have incubators, so it was a good idea back then. The question that's begging to be asked, and I'll ask your question for you because I think it's a legitimate question that we spoke about beforehand, and again, I don't work for the company, and I told them this a long time ago too, is that what are we all doing in the lab? We all have these little waffle makers now, these benchtop incubators. And one of those microscopes is not going to fit in your benchtop incubator. So they need to do that. I don't know where they're at. My feeling is that this company is going to morph to be a software company where they will take anyone's image and they say, image analyzed by Eeva or by Oxygen or by Behr or whatever they want to call it. And that it will be an imaging, because that's the unique aspect of this, is that it uses dark field images. So I was waiting for someone to ask me about the light. We work in the dark in the lab, we worry about light. But what you may have been able to pick up is that those are not the nice pretty images like I could show you that we have from Hoffman or the EmbryoScope that uses a very nice bright field or phase contrast or differential interference contrast image. This uses dark field microscopy. So only the cell membranes are illuminated, and that helps the sort of the image recognition to sort of pixelize the oolemma or the embryo membrane and actually measures those divisions. So that's the part that I did that I could speak very clearly on and comfortably. I'm happy to defend or at least answer questions about how they actually did the validation. They had an FDA, I can tell you the company had an FDA consultant. I had nothing to do with this. But I know they hired an FDA consultant, and anyone who's gone through an FDA approval process, it's a lot of back and forth, You give them your data and they have to have 90 days to reply, and 89.9 days you get a letter back saying we need this much stuff. And then you go back and I don't know what you do, and you come back 6 months later and you wait 90 days again and then tell you, no, we want this much stuff. And so I know it was expensive as heck. They did trials that they didn't plan on doing, and the trial I wanted them to do was to do one trial only. Would either sell this product or they'd go broke. But I think if they sold it, there wouldn't be another product on the market, and that would be day 3 transfer, single embryo transfer with Eeva versus a single blast transfer. End of story. I mean, tell me who wouldn't be convinced if you transferred one embryo on day 3 and got the same or a higher pregnancy rate than one embryo on day 5. You didn't have to culture to day 5, didn't have to worry about epigenetics and all the other things that some people worry about. But it was too expensive because no one's going to let you put a single embryo transfer in on day 3 unless you pay for this cycle. And when they did the power, it was going to cost like $4 million to do that study, and they changed their mind. They spent more than that getting there, but in the beginning it was too expensive. So there was a question about how to calibrate and what type of maintenance is required. I don't know, to be quite honest. But I can tell you, having had the system that we invented was bricks and mortar compared to a CAD design of what we have now. The system, part of the way, and again, I wish there was someone from the company who could tell you how it really works, but they pay. I think the system is that you pay like a rental fee that includes maintenance and updates. So there's a two-tier, like a two-way you pay. One is like each time you use it, and the other one is just like, you don't buy the equipment. It's not a big capital outlay like some of the other companies, $100,000. It's like they give you the things and you pay a maintenance fee for software updates so that you're not left with last year's software when the guy next door has got next year's software. Netflix, I guess. So, but I can tell you, all I know is that in the research ones we've had and the one we've had now, they come there and they pull the research label off, and they did something on the software. It's very, very stable. It's quite simple, to be quite honest. They've never had a problem with it. Never seized, never glitched, never failed. I mean, I can tell you the people that they hired, the staff from Silicon, I mean, it's in Silicon Valley. They hired people from Apple, Google, Cisco. I mean, they got, and all these, what do you call it? These companies that do all the cardiac catheter guidance and all these different, there's a lot of sort of bioengineer people. There's a big engineering team, and they did a good job from the reliability standpoint. They didn't do a good job in getting it to fit in a little Mink incubator, a little benchtop Labortech, ESCO, whatever you use. How much? There's no question it makes a difference. There's no question. You can chop it any way you want. There's never the same, and it's always an increase, whether it's statistically significant or not. The trend is always this way. So it makes a difference. What is that difference worth? That is the question. And that is what I can't, it's what it's worth to you. Some people want it so that they can bring more patients into their clinic and never use time lapse. I've seen technology like, do you do ICSI? Back in 1994. No, we don't do ICSI, click. They don't even know if you need ICSI or not, but if you don't have the latest, then there's something wrong with your clinic. Some people are going to use it for that. Some people are going to use it for actually helping select the embryos. And I think the difference is, a 10% difference in implantation is huge. There's nothing we can do in our lab that can make it 10. You can buy a new incubator, you can change media. Other than changing day of transfer, there's not, or invasive PGD or PGS, which I support, as you know. So I'm not against any of that stuff. But there's nothing we do that can make that kind of a jump. So I would think we're in Silicon Valley. Patients they have all the gadgets in the world. They're spending $12,000 for this. If I can offer you, an X percent, what is it? Is it 5%? Is it 3%? Is it 15%? It's somewhere in that range, improvement. It's not 50% and it's not 1%, but it's at a few percent. And it's cost $1,000. Do you want it? And we're honest. We say we don't know how much it's going to help. Here's the data, total disclosure, total transparency. That's how we sell it. We've done 4 that patients have paid and patients want it. I can tell you, we're going to do more. We've only had it, literally up and running with the research label peeled off about, probably a month. And we've done 4 patients. So, and we're a university. We're Stanford. We're not advertising. We're not Pacific Fertility on the radio, on the news, on the TV, and have our magazines out everywhere. So I don't know. I mean, it's a totally good question, but
I just wasn't sure how you guys presented to your patients.
I could see people totally overselling it. I could see that. In my program, we won't do that. We say what we know. It could help. And patients will do anything. If you've done 3 IVF cycles and you haven't gotten pregnant, you'll try an ERA, you'll try this, you'll try that. Someone does an ERA test, how much is that going to cost? That costs a lot, because it's not just the test, how much is it going to help? Shit, I don't know.
So I guess
The only time Eeva's going to help you with PGS is if you've got 2 normals.
I agree with that.
And I tell you, I think people say, well, I'm doing PGS, I don't need this. I'm going, no, if you're doing PGS, you actually need it more. And you actually shouldn't charge for it. Charge a little bit more for your biopsy and just eat the cost of the Eeva, because it's going to help you do better, I think. I mean, that donor blastocyst study was quite revealing to me. And again, what we have to be careful, these were prospective. You have to be careful a lot of these retrospective results, which is what 80% of the time-lapse data that's published is there, unfortunately. Is that when we look back at our data, people who had high this, they did that, and people who had low this did that. Well, that's selecting patients, that's not selecting embryos. And just because, how do you know within a patient that you could select the embryos? And that's the question that, really needs to be answered. And that's why I chose 2 prospective examples, because they actually used the information and made a decision versus looked back and saw which patients had high embryos and which patients had low embryos and how they did. Well, maybe that's about the patient, not about the selection. So, again, I fully respect and understand and expected to get pummeled a little bit up here because, well, number one, to have you think that I'm trying to sell this, which I'm not. And there's not enough data out there on the PGS, the single embryo transfer, but I think it's coming. It's not because this technology is bad or people are trying to sell things, before it's ready. I just think it's a matter of time. And there's going to be, I think, updates to this, as there should be. It's like the PC in, 1990. You know, it's a lot different. You know, there's more power on your watch, you know, than, you know, especially now with an iWatch, but more power on your watch than, you know, your PC when I was in graduate school. What I've learned is that good ideas and good discoveries don't always make good businesses. And, you know, I'm totally a believer in this idea. I think this is the way to do it with a diagnostic, where it gives you something to sort of, you know, latch onto and not have to kind of use more, you know, overlay subjectivity on top of subjectivity. But, you know, is it going to, you know, the first company that started this is pretty much gone now. It's now called Progeny. And, you know, I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be exactly as Mike said, how they make it accessible to people to get it in their hands, and just see how this is, you know, if it's not if it doesn't sell itself, then it's not going to be successful. If people try to shove it down your throat, it's no good. But I really believe in it. I think it can work, and it makes a difference. The question is, how much is that difference worth? And time will tell. So the question was, can the software be adapted to other systems? And I think this is where the real potential lies, in that they have this this image recognition. They have the algorithm that applies automatically. The greater reach for the company would be to read anyone's image and give you the diagnosis, like, you know, like you see in a baseball game or a football game, you know, brought to you by, or image analysis by Eeva or something like that, even though you're using a different box. So, you know, that seems very reasonable to me, and that way you don't just have, you know, it's like HP selling print cartridges for all printers, you know, not just for their printer. It would be better if you could, you know, just have cartridges that fit for every printer, and you would make even more money, have a greater reach. So,
thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me here.
And I hope that helps. And I also want to thank those in the industries that have supported our ongoing effort for, like, the independent film industry. We have the independent thought leader opportunity here from the folks at, and I'm just going down this, and you all know who you are, but from activists in Fairing, and Genesis Genetics, and Good Start, and Irvine, and Life Global, and my eyes are getting worse, and Mandel's and Merck, and Serono, and Smith's Medical, and Walgreens, and Oxygen too. But you all help to make this possible so that you share the newest things that may not only be innovative, but spur us on to think differently and forward. And so I thank you all for your support as well. I hope this has been an enjoyable evening for each and every one of you. We'll continue in the fall. And if you have any other questions for Dr. Behr,
I'm here.
He's not doing anything until his flight when?
6:30. That's your time, not my time. It's going to be really early.
All right, thank you all again.
All right, thank you.